Our guest is Mr. Peter Baum. Mr. Peter Baum, research scholar, writer, and also the international editor of BLiTZ. Mr. Baum, welcome to this interview.
Thank you. It's my honor and privilege to be with you.
First of all, we'd like to ask one very important question that, as we both of us know, that there is a kind of the hostility in the international media against Israel, against Jews, and I can say it's a kind of the anti-Semite madness. In your opinion, what are the reasons behind international media's bias towards the anti-Semite and Israel-hating blocs?
Yes, this has been a phenomenon that has been noticeable at least for the last 20 years. In fact, even in the year 2003, the BBC were forced into an independent inquiry called the Baum report, which they never actually published. And despite legal attempts to get the BBC to publish the report, which was all about anti-Semitism within the BBC, they were able, because it was an internal report, not to do it. And since that date, 2003, the BBC has continued with a very left-wing bias, a very anti-Jewish state bias. And when it's anti-Jewish state, it morphs into anti-Semitism. And we've noticed also that other mainstream media channels such as CNN, MSNBC, and certainly Al Jazeera, which is, as we all know, funded by the government of Qatar, have continued on this anti-Jewish state bias. There is only one media outlet that we think is at least impartial towards Israel, and that's Fox. And of course, your own people in Bangladesh, in BLiTZ, who have been wonderfully, I would say neutral, very anti-militant, and trying to challenge the anti-Jewish state bias that we see in mainstream media. It's a remarkable phenomenon. We don't know whether it's because it's all the people working in those channels are Jew haters. We don't think they are, but we think there's definitely a very left-wing bias, and Israel is at the forefront of their antagonism.
We are seeing that kind of the continuous so-called protest by the pro-Hamas Palestinians and Arabs in the Western countries. We don't see such a protest in Islamabad or in Dhaka or most of the Muslim countries. We don't see this, but it's happening in the Western countries, in Britain, in London, in UK, in Washington, and everywhere. So, I mean, in my opinion, this is a kind of these radical Muslims and the appeasers of terrorism and supporters of Hamas. They are flexing muscle. They are showing signs of Islamic conquest. They want to turn the Western nations into Islamic state. So under such scenarios, what do you think? I mean, what the Western policymakers must do to stop such notoriety of these thugs?
Well, some commentators are suggesting it has gone too far. We are seeing the rise of immigration, mainly from Muslim countries, into all the Western countries, and with that, we are seeing the incredible expansion of mosques, and within these mosques come hate preachers who influence the young Muslims who are largely uneducated and unemployed. So the mosque for the young Muslim in Western countries is a school of thought, a school of education. It gives them reason to believe. And as the Muslim population increases in Western countries, and as Muslim people become more indoctrinated with the imams that are in the mosques, this culminates in a very anti-Western and very anti-Jewish state environment. And as you know, for the Islamic fundamentalist countries, the Jews, followed by the Christians, and then probably the Hindus and Sikhs come in that order. But the Jewish state of Israel is really their bone of contention. That's the one state that they want to eliminate and exterminate all the Jews. The other thing is that, and this is not a recent phenomenon, but it's being proved more and more, the funding for such hostile Islamic fundamentalism emanates from Iran and Qatar. Now, in the Sahel areas of Africa, we have seen how fundamentalist Islam is wreaking havoc across countries such as Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Somalia, etc., etc. And the indigenous black population, whether they're Muslim or not, have suffered hugely at the hands of Islamic terrorist groups funded by Iran and Qatar. We've seen that in the United Kingdom and certainly in France. And there is now, I believe, going to be a fight back. I think what happened on October the 7th is going to be the trigger for governments and non-Muslims to understand that something very sinister has been going on, and we haven't been hard enough in challenging the Islamic fundamentalism that has, like a plague, spread in Western societies.
We know, actually, to my knowledge, that Muslim, Islamic mosques, and say mosques in the Western countries, those are breeding ground of jihad. And I'd like to just share with some statistics with you that in London, for example, during the last 10 years, the sale of burqas and hijab has increased by 45 to 50%. Muslim men, they're attending their Friday prayers wearing Arab attires, and they are listening to the Friday sermons where the mullahs, they are telling the attendees to kill Jews and Christians, and they are also talking about jihad. They are talking about supremacy of Islam. So, I mean, in a country like UK and in London, the increase in sale of burqas and hijab at the rate of 40% to 50%. And this is the result of the Muslim immigration, especially before the Brexit. I mean, the hundreds and thousands of Muslims from the European countries, they have flocked into UK. At the same time, thousands of Muslims are entering England through the English Channel. So this is a very dangerous situation, alarming situation. And with this alarming scenario, now we are witnessing the so-called protest attack on Jewish individuals, homes, businesses, even synagogues. So, I mean, how are you Western people surrendering your country to radical Islam?
You've expressed it very eloquently and very well. The Jewish population in the United Kingdom currently numbers no more than 250,000 people. The Islamic population is now numbering somewhere around 3.5 million people. And they're very vocal and they're very extreme, and they appeal to an uneducated group of mainly young men who hear nothing other than anti-Semitic sermons emanating from the imams. Now, this recent Palestinian-Israeli conflict has actually exposed, like never before, how hostile the Islamic youth is, not only to Judeo-Christian values, but for democratic Western values. And this has been a wake-up call for politicians of all parties. Unfortunately, there are a group of people within the UK who fully support the Islamic fundamentalists, and they are from the extreme wing of the Labour Party, the left wing. Years ago in the 1930s, it used to be the extreme right that were anti-Semitic. Now it is extreme left. And unless the silent majority, which is still the vast majority of people in the UK, stand up and start challenging what we have witnessed in the last couple of years, then I fear for the democracy, not only for the United Kingdom, but for other countries such as France, Germany, Belgium as well. And this is all as a result of what we were talking about earlier, the funding by Iran and Qatar for Islamic fundamentalist groups in the Sahel regions of Northern Africa and exporting their people into Western Europe. When we see the boats coming over to Europe, 95%, if not more, are young men between the ages of 15 and 40. We don't see women and children, or if we do, we only see a tiny minority, but we see some mostly indoctrinated people from Islam coming over to our shores and bringing their hatred, their hostility, their anti-Semitism, their anti-Christian values, their anti-Hindu and Sikh values into the UK. But as we know from history, it's always the Jewish population that are the ones that are the first to be hit and kicked and molested, and the ones that are at the forefront. And then if Islam gets its way, it's the other members of different religious groups that come second. We're seeing that. So I'm hoping that our government is going to start to challenge what is so obvious to the silent majority, who themselves are now getting very worried about the way Islamic fundamentalists are behaving. I'll give you just one example of what's happening this week. This week marks what we call Armistice Weekend. It's when we in the United Kingdom and all over Europe honour the dead from the World War I and World War II. It's remembering those who fought for our freedoms and for our democracies. And we have seen this week a number of war memorials being defaced by Islamic fundamentalists, the pro-Palestinian brigade. And that has outraged the silent majority. I'm hoping this will be the trigger point where there is a challenge to what is going on in the mosques, in schools, in Islamic communities. Unfortunately, I haven't seen one Muslim member of parliament, nor one Muslim imam, nor one high-profile Muslim celebrity or media commentator speak out in disgust at what's happening, and that is very concerning.
You know that you have been extensively writing in BLiTZ and many other newspapers in the world, exposing the falsehood of Palestine. And being inspired by your writings, recently I have also written one article that even Mahmoud Abbas and Ismail Haniyeh, they don't want Palestine. Actually, according to Quran, there is nothing called Palestine. And with our efforts, especially your research and your exposures, people are getting to know the reality of this fairy tale called Palestine. So, as the international editor of our newspaper, how do you assess the role of BLiTZ when we are exposing the myth, telling the truth that actually there is nothing called Palestine?
Okay, so I am actually heartened by how many people our articles are getting out to, and how many people are being re-educated about the mythology surrounding the Palestinian people and the myth about their lands being stolen, and more importantly, the way they try to connect their religion, Islam, to the Palestinian state. What is so remarkable to you and to I is that actually supporting Palestinian claims to any of the geography from a purely religious Islamic perspective is probably the most Islamophobic act that one could commit. Why? Because as we have studied, as our research shows, and there are many imams that support this but are too afraid to put their heads above the parapet, never, not once, in all of the Quranic surahs are Palestinians or Jerusalem mentioned. What is mentioned in a number of Quranic surahs is how Allah and Muhammad bequeathed, bestowed, and promised the geography to none other than the children of Israel or the Jewish people. Now, if through our writings we can get more people to understand that and to react to it and to relate to it, I think, given what is going on in society at the moment, that is probably the best way forward for us to challenge the Palestinian false narrative by quoting Quranic scripture, by saying, look, if you really are a true Muslim, then you would be supportive of the Jewish state of Israel and not any claims the Palestinians make. And through your wonderful publication and through the number of times both you and I and others appear on podcasts for various television and radio programs, I think that is the best methodology. It is remarkable to me how little mainstream media pays attention to what is so obvious. They ignore the biblical Quranic scriptures, if you like. But I think if we got that message across, that is the best way in this hostile environment to challenge Palestinian geographical claims to any of the area.
Actually, in my opinion, that these Palestine fairy tale, I call it fairy tale, or what do you say, myth? Okay, Palestine. It's a kind of the business corporation of Mahmoud Abbas and Ismail Haniyeh. I mean, in one hand is Mahmoud Abbas, a corrupt and looter. On the other hand, Ismail Haniyeh with a terrorist and also corrupt. So they are just cashing on this kind of the fairy tale, and they are enriching their own families and everyone around them. They are becoming wealthier. They are living in luxury. So you're right that there is nothing called Palestine in Quran, nowhere. The Quran says this land belongs to the children of Israel, very clearly, not once, several times. So in my opinion, when a Muslim talks about Palestine, demands about anything related to so-called Palestine, it's a blasphemy. It's a blasphemy. You are ignoring Quran. You are ignoring the God. You are ignoring the Prophet. So you are worse than an atheist. You are committing blasphemy, and actually you are an atheist. You are not a Muslim. Even not an atheist. You are an evil person. And you have joined this commercial corporation of Yasser al-Arafat, which is called Palestine. This was a business venture. Now it is being inherited by Mahmoud Abbas, and it will carry on. I mean, they are doing business. This is a business entity. And for this business entity, the looters and the criminals and the terrorists of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, they are continuing terrorist acts. Because why? Through this terrorist act, they want to keep this myth alive for the sake of their own.
Absolutely correct. The Palestinian hierarchy has absolutely no interest to ensure that peace reigns in the area. But from a purely personal financial aspect, they have every interest in keeping the conflict going. And who suffers? The Palestinian people and the Israeli people, all as a result of the funding received from Qatar and Iran, keeping the idea of a two-state solution alive, but in reality, not ever wanting it to happen. Now, something else is very, very important that I feel that I must explain before we conclude this interview. In this current conflict that started on October the 7th, Hamas crossed a red line. In previous episodes, there has been some nasty killings, and the Israelis have responded, and after about a couple of weeks, it all dies down and we get back to some kind of uneasy truce. This time round, because of this pogrom, the Israelis have realized that they must act to destroy Hamas, which they will do. Before I came on to this interview, I received a call from some colleagues in Israel, and they have completely cut off the northern part of Gaza and defeated Hamas in that area. And now it is the southern part of Gaza that will go into, where all the hostages are held. Having defeated Hamas, and they will achieve that objective in probably 3 or 4 weeks' time, what this means is that Iran and Qatar have received a deathly blow. One of Iran's limbs would have been cut off with the defeat of Hamas. The United States recognise this, the European Union recognise this, and that's why I think both the European Union and the United States acted so quickly in sending military cruise carriers into the Mediterranean Sea to warn Hizbullah that if they really start attacking Israel, the United States would not hesitate to act. Now, overnight, we've seen both the United States and Israel attack Iranian and Hezbollah arms depots in Syria. I truly believe that Hezbollah have been warned off from attacking Israel. The Houthis made some minor commitments by firing rockets from Yemen directed at Israel that were shot down by the United States and Saudi Arabia. I also believe that Saudi have given Israel the blessing to go ahead and destroy Hamas, in the knowledge that this will mean a devastating blow to Iran. So I think if we speak again, which we will do, I'm sure, in 1 month's time, Hamas will be totally defeated and the Palestinian people will at least have a chance with reconstruction efforts to live a normal life, but not under the totalitarian theocracy and terrorism of Hamas.
As you know, that Saudi Arabia is on the process of normalizing relations with the state of Israel. And it is said that the Hamas has did this at the instructions of Iran to somehow jeopardize the process of normalizing relations between Riyadh and Jerusalem, which I don't believe Saudi Arabia will be normalizing relations very soon with Israel. But do you think, because Saudi Arabia is considered as a leader of the Muslim world, so when Saudi Arabia is normalizing relations with Israel, do you think that all other Muslim countries in the world, including mine, Bangladesh, needs to also follow the path and normalize relations with Israel?
Now, this is a very interesting and pertinent question. Even during this conflict, those countries that have normalized relations with Israel, such as the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco, have not been what I would say antagonistic towards Israel. Bahrain has temporarily withdrawn her ambassador, but that is really to placate their domestic audience. Saudi, we've seen clips from various Saudi journalists that are actually being anti-Hamas. So our intuition is that once Hamas have been completely defeated, the Abraham Accords will get back on track. Saudi will normalize relations with Israel. Saudi has one problem at the moment, and that is that after years of indoctrinating their population with anti-Jewish state rhetoric through the media, through universities, through their schools, they are gradually going through the process of deleting any references to anti-Semitism. I think they've actually achieved that objective. This has huge implications for Saudi Arabia, her people, and Israel-Arab relations, Israel-Muslim relations going forward. I truly believe that the government of Saudi Arabia are slowly but surely controlling their output to ensure that their population becomes less antagonistic towards the Jewish state. That will be an ongoing process. The defeat of Hamas will give Saudis extra comfort because they know that Iran would have been dealt a blow. And I truly believe if we're speaking a year from now, Saudi would have normalized relations with Israel and many other Islamic countries. And I pray that it will be Bangladesh will definitely follow and normalize relations with Israel.
And in my opinion, Mr. Baum, that the annihilation of Hamas is very, very important for the peace in the Middle East, especially for the security of Saudi Arabia, because Iran would be using Hamas in the near future against Saudi Arabia and other Muslim nations. Before we conclude, I would like to ask you the last question that recently, as you know, that US President Joe Biden and the Secretary of State Antony Blinken, they have been repeatedly demanding of so-called humanitarian pause or even ceasefire. But as per international conventions and even UN convention, calling for such ceasefire or humanitarian pause, it can be deemed as war crime. So, I mean, why, in your opinion, Biden and his administration, they are taking the risk of committing a war crime by calling for ceasefire or the so-called humanitarian pause?
Okay, so there are two aspects to this. The first one is the geopolitical aspect, and the second one is the domestic audience. On the geopolitical side, I have no doubt that the current US administration, and indeed, although we've got an election coming up next year in the US, I believe that whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats go through, I truly believe that geopolitically, the US administrations and the next administration want Israel to achieve their objective by destroying Hamas. That will be a major political gain for the US and her allies. Calling for a ceasefire or humanitarian pause is just playing to a domestic audience. There's elections coming up both in the UK and in the US next year. And the polls show that it could be very tight in the United States of America, not so tight in the UK, where at the moment the opposition have quite a strong lead, but that lead is narrowing. So calling for a pause or ceasefire is not playing to the geopolitical wider audience, it's playing to the domestic audience where there is understandably opposition to this war. What is the paradox here is even though 600,000 plus people have been killed in Syria, 250,000 people have been killed in Yemen, in the Turkey-Kurdish conflict, over 100,000 have been killed. We've never seen one protest on the streets of our cities about those conflicts. And even the Ukraine-Russia war has been forgotten. Israel, because it is the only Jewish state of the world, and because there is such hostility to the Jewish state of Israel from Western Muslim audiences, is at the forefront of media attention. Having said that, going back to your original question, I think the politicians calling for ceasefires and humanitarian corridors are simply playing to their domestic audience, but in reality want Israel to finish the job as quickly as possible.
We were talking to Mr. Peter Baum, a very esteemed research scholar, writer, and international editor of BLiTZ. Mr. Baum, thank you so much for joining us during this interview.
Thank you, my brother. Thank you.